and welcome to or back to my channel. I'm Kit, your friendly feminist cat lady spinster, and today we're going to talk about Dear Sister. This was the original video I was planning about Dear Sister before being sidetracked by her atrocious views on marital sex and making a video about that instead. She and the Biblical Wife were recommended to me some months ago, and I still need meds for my blood pressure. But anyway, if you didn't see the first video, Dear Sister is an Instagrammer who writes notes on womanhood to her sisters in Christ and tells us the untold history of feminism. Or as her bio now says, the little known history of. And I have to say, the amount of energy these folks put into trying to convince people not to be feminists is really strange. Anyway, let's get into it, and to start, let's have Sister introduce herself.
Hi, I'm Christiana. I'm here to make radical and shocking suggestions along the lines of actually having sex with the man you married, prioritizing the man who pledged his life to you more than everybody else, discussing family matters with the man you made vows to before discussing with other women. Follow for more extremist content. Classical Girl posted, "Babies are expensive" is antinatalist propaganda. Sister's response? Here to tell you this. I come from a family of 13 that, according to American standards, was far below the poverty line. We spent $300 on groceries per year. The rest of our food we grew and or butchered. We didn't have plumbing nor AC, and we thought new socks made a great Christmas present, and we lived this way on purpose. We grew up breathing fresh air, drinking raw milk from our own cows, and working very hard, all together, in the sun. We took lots of physical risks and rarely saw a doctor, and not one of us broke a bone. If you ask me, we were wealthy.
Right. So who wants to tell her there's a difference between living that way on purpose and living that way because you have no other option? For that matter, keeping animals, even working animals, costs money, not to mention land, so a lot of people wouldn't even have the option to drink that raw milk or butcher their own meat.
Shout out to my oppressive, patriarchal husband who keeps me chained to this life wherein I get to spend my days cooking, making our house a home, helping with his business, raising our own children, home educating them, feeding them with the bounty I've nurtured in my garden and chicken coop, drinking in fresh air and sunshine, serving the community around me, and just generally being so very miserable. Hashtag feed the patriarchy.
In between posts about her home and garden, this is her content. She is a smart woman. She knows no one thinks a woman choosing to stay at home means she's oppressed. The oppression comes when you have no choice, and there is no way she doesn't know that. Now we're going to hear a little rant about femininity and feminism that I had a few thoughts on.
I think that God created all women to nurture. There are lots of different ways to nurture, the point remains. And one of the great crimes of feminism was in making women feel as if this was not enough, this was a sexist idea, this wasn't essential.
I want to be clear here because I think sometimes people misunderstand. If you are a woman and you enjoy traditionally feminine things, that's great. There is no shame in that. And if you are a woman and you don't really enjoy or enjoy at all traditionally feminine things, that's great too. There is also no shame in that. Feminism was never against women being nurturing. It was against women being told that was their sole purpose.
The feminist movement undeniably fought to get women out of their homes into traditionally masculine spheres and to embrace fierceness over nurturing. There is no question that Hollywood made it look much more cool and fulfilling to roundhouse kick a man across a room than to lovingly cook his breakfast. For decades, these feminist values have been forced at every institutional level and patently plastered all over the silver screen. We'd have to be exceptionally ignorant or willfully obtuse to deny that this has had real-life ramifications on the way that generations of women think about femininity and womanhood.
Let me know in the comments if you would go see a movie about a woman lovingly cooking a man breakfast. Anyway, I don't understand this idea that feminism told women to be fierce instead of nurturing. It doesn't matter who you are or what decade you're in. In some situations you're fierce and in some you're nurturing. Some people are more fierce than others and some are more nurturing. But what is this nonsense that you have to be one or the other, and if you're one, you can never be the other? And as for fighting to get women out of their homes and into traditionally masculine spheres, we'll set aside the fact that not working was a luxury and most women did have to work, even in 1950s America. Does she consider nursing and teaching masculine? Or is it just getting a paycheck that makes something masculine?
Women have, for so long, been indoctrinated to run from nurturing in various forms that they don't even know what it feels like anymore.
Really? Because last I knew, teaching and nursing were still mostly women, and I would consider them nurturing professions.
There's a knee-jerk reaction to actions we've been told are stereotypes or even misogynistic. There's an odd obligation to earn the right to a little femininity by first proving that we can be super masculine. There's a weird sense that we must not let womankind down by being vulnerable and delighting in our femininity, reinforced by feminist bullying about being a pick-me or whatever the latest dung blather happens to be. So many women are afraid to let themselves just fall into this role and take genuine pleasure in it. When they do, they seem confused. They seem confused by the way that a newborn tugs on their heartstrings or by how much they long to be the wife of a good man. They don't even realize how satisfying it can be.
Confession. I didn't think pick-me was a real thing, but I've since seen a few things, and I do think it's real. However, unlike how Sister would have us believe, no one calls a woman who enjoys wearing dresses, sewing clothing for her 5 children, and baking cakes a pick-me. And if they do, they're either being a troll or a jackass. Being a pick-me is something more like, most women don't deserve the right to vote. They just don't. And finally, she is aware that most people still marry and have kids, right? Or does she believe that if a woman has kids and a job, she isn't being a properly nurturing wife and mother?
Reject this nonsense. Brainwashing is not undone without significant effort. Do not forget that for most of human history, the women before us were deeply valued for the vocation of wife and mother. To be a man's wife meant something. A postpartum woman was treated with deep tenderness and care and significant periods of healing. Only in this post-feminist wasteland do we see mothers treated like chattel, ripped from the babies in whom our literal cells live, driven back to work in the corporate world like slaves. Feminism robbed entire cultures of something precious. You don't have to let it rob you personally. The battle is in your mind. Fight it.
What nonsense are we rejecting? Anyway, please tell me when women were actually valued for being wives and mothers. Not just lip service, but actually treated with the respect you would give a fellow human instead of being treated like a man's rightful property. And that whole lying in and confinement that you read about in, say, Jane Austen books, that was a privilege given to wealthy women, not women as a whole. And yes, sister, women have worked throughout history. This post-feminist wasteland you speak of is actually late-stage capitalism. So, to change things up a bit, I'm going to include a post from her husband, The Masculine Mandate. Let me know in the comments, do you think it bothers him that his wife has a larger social media following?
This little girl, she is cheerful, kind, a peacemaker, loves wearing dresses, long golden hair, instinctual grace in the way she moves, loves her aprons, loves to help mommy in the kitchen, joyfully asks to do the vacuuming, the list goes on. Her mother, dear sister, has trained and modeled for her well. Some people may see this as oppression, but not only is there so much joy in her heart now, but later will yield many more good fruits. By preparing her to be a cheerful, feminine helper now, and setting the bar high for what to look for in a man, we are helping create a beautiful future for her where she has her choice of godly men pursuing her, and will more likely be cherished and protected by her future husband by embracing these qualities. And she will also raise up children who rise and call her blessed. Training your little girls in cheerful, godly femininity is the greatest gift you can give to their future.
All children should have age-appropriate chores. Not gender-appropriate, age-appropriate. Everyone should learn how to become a competent adult. But this post is just sad to me. He's looking at her as a future wife, not as his daughter, not as an individual with her own wants and desires. Her life has been predetermined because she's a girl. She will marry and submit to her husband. Or she will remain single and submit to her father. She will never get to be her own person. So the previous post was from a few months ago, but this one is from July. And for my listeners, it's a picture of dear sister's daughter offering a fork to the masculine mandate with the hashtags feed the patriarchy and start them young. Someone did respond unfavorably to this, which I feel confident in saying sister was hoping for.
Commenter, the hashtags are horrific. Your daughter does not exist to serve men. What an awful way to raise her. Sister says, it breaks my heart in two to think of how many women will never know the love, peace, satisfaction, and brings tears to your eyes joy of a marriage done God's way because they're so convinced that men and God are the enemy.
You don't have to think men are an enemy to believe that little girls shouldn't be raised to be of service to men, godly or otherwise. But she turned this into a whole post, so let's continue.
Let's talk about this idea that if a woman hates men, she must have been hurt by one. Does this happen? Absolutely. But having spoken with scores of women and making a point to seriously observe these dynamics for 12 plus years, I think it seriously misses the mark. It pins all of the blame on bad men and ignores two other major sources of man-hate: feminist indoctrination and sin.
Where did she do these observations? Also, does she think she's the only one that observes and talks to people? Anyway, there's no part of feminism that requires man-hating, and thinking women weren't born to serve men doesn't mean you hate men. But there's more.
In feminist and post-feminist cultures, we are bombarded with female supremacy jargon, curriculum, media, leading questions, etc. at every level of society, constantly, usually from just about the time we're born. I have personally known many a woman who grew up surrounded by truly good men, but nevertheless had a chip on her shoulder because she has succumbed to the narrative that women are just slightly better human beings and that we have a lot to work against because of the patriarchy.
Can someone tell me a culture that is post-feminist? Anyway, I've lived in many places and known many people, and none of the women I've met have hated men. It's so interesting how so many trad folk know women who hate men. Given their logic, I would think I would be more likely to know these man-hating women, being a feminist living in cities and all. Is it possible they're lying? Or do they take a woman expressing a negative feeling toward a man as hatred? But there's still more. And then she touches on sin, which I'm not bothering with because it's just nonsense. But it is on the screen if you'd like to pause and read.
Many women's man-hatred comes from their own sinful flesh, refusing to forgive after rejection, steeping in resentment over various wrongs, misattributing them to men, specifically when they're wrongs of which either sex can be guilty, rebelling against their parents and making poor choices in men, then blaming those men and choosing to believe they represent men as a whole, living promiscuous lives, and rather than recognizing the natural consequences and the ensuing guilt and pain, blaming the men they slept with of their own free will. Basic pride and selfishness that turns into bitter gall.
Can someone explain to me how rebelling against their parents links to making poor choices in men?
And usually, underneath this low view of men and resistance to male authority, there's a seething hatred of God, which always manifests itself in a rejection of the way he designed things.
This will likely never become clear to folks like Sister, but people who don't believe in your God do not live their life in spite of or despite said God.
Whether she realizes it or not, a woman who has a problem with what God has ordained ultimately has a problem with God himself. Those who don't surrender to him choose rebellion toward him. It is one or the other. There is no limit to the sinfulness and deceitful nature of the human heart.
I really hate how they drag everyone into their religion, even when we don't believe in it. I'm not surrendering to your God, Sister, nor am I rebelling against him. You can't rebel against something you don't believe in. But no, it's just my sinful and deceitful heart.
Again, I'm not denying that bad experiences with men seem to be the catalyst for some women becoming feminists. I'm also definitely not denying that good men, and especially good fathers, shape a woman's view of men in a colossal way. I'm living proof of this. But without going into detail, I am also here to tell you that I have had enough bad experiences with men to have potentially become a radical feminist myself. As with all of life, it's less about what's been done to us and more about how we choose to respond to it.
So, feminists are women who have had bad experiences with men? So what about married women who are feminists? What about male feminists? I'm a feminist. I date men. What does that mean? This is some bizarre thinking. So women just wanted the vote because men were mean to them? Women just wanted to be able to work and support themselves because of bad men? If not for the bad men, feminism would never have existed? Does she know that feminism is hundreds of years old? She purports to tell us the untold history of feminism, so she must, but she acts otherwise. Before this was a post, it was a story, and I am so curious as to her reasoning for changing potentially become a feminist myself to potentially become a radical feminist myself. And finally, I leave you with this.
I grew up in purity culture. I think very positively towards sex and have a fire sex life. Yes, it's a lot more popular to circulate stories about how purity culture is damaging and creates shame around sex, but that wasn't true for me, nor for lots of people. We should probably talk about that more.
It's great that purity culture wasn't damaging to Sister, but the people talking about how damaging purity culture is aren't doing it because of an agenda. It's because they were actually hurt by it. And I don't understand how someone becomes an adult, gets married, has kids of their own, and still can't understand that their experience is not everyone's. And that's it for this video. If you made it this far, thank you so much for watching. I would like to thank my patrons, and if you would like to help support the channel, my Patreon is linked below along with everything else. Have a great day, night, whenever you happen to be watching this, and fade to cats. So a lot of people wouldn't even have the option to drink that raw meat